Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our session on the 60-second introduction. I just want to start by giving an introduction, and I'm not going to promise it's going to be 60 seconds necessarily. That's just, the timing that we're going to talk about in this session is the timing isn't as important as the content and the delivery and how you go about doing it. And so I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to know a little bit about what we're expecting, which is why I use 60 seconds. And it's just a good general rule to keep in mind regardless, so that you are giving information, but not too much. So you're not talking too long, but you're also not, just waving your hand saying hello and sitting down. So let me go ahead and just take a moment here, and I'll give you my personal introduction that hopefully will help you get to know me a little bit better, but also just give you an example of what a 60-second introduction could look like, even though yours is probably going to be slightly different than mine. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Heath Queen. I am the coordinator for Engaged Learning in the Department of Business at Wittenberg University. I have the opportunity every day to work with students surrounding professional development, career opportunities, internships, and just helping them get ready for their life and their future after graduation from Wittenberg. Previous to my time at working at Wittenberg University, I worked at the Reynolds and Reynolds Company in Dayton, Ohio. I served as the digital advertising specialist and digital marketing analyst there, where I worked with 20 to 30 car dealerships every year and managing their advertising accounts and spending money in digital advertising for them to help aid in their sales. I have a degree in political science from Wittenberg University, and I'm currently pursuing my Master's of Divinity through Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm thankful for the opportunity to meet with you today and to show off these great students that we have from Wittenberg, and hope to continue to connect with you professionally in the future, and would like to thank you for being an amazing Wittenberg alumni who support us each and every day in the many ways that you do so. So on the side note, I'm married to my wife, Courtney. We live in Columbus, Ohio, and she is currently doing her master's at Ohio State, and we enjoy spending time together outside of work. So thank you. It's great to meet you, and have a great morning. That, in a nutshell, is a 60-second introduction. Is it perfect? Is it going to follow everything? No, because every time you give the 60-second introduction, it's a little different. It shouldn't be too different, but every time you give it, it's just natural that you have to get yourself in the mood of giving that introduction. But it's really helpful just to hear an example. And so, I'm not saying that that's a perfect example, that that's something you should follow, but I want you to have a kind of an idea of what we're talking about as we go through this session on 60-second introductions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll talk a little bit about the different parts and pieces of a 60-second introduction. We like to call this an elevator pitch. For those of you who've been in 365 before, managing effective organizations, we've talked about this because you have to give one in that class. And it's named an elevator pitch because, if you were in an elevator and you had only your elevator ride to talk to someone, to introduce yourself, and to tell them tell them something important about you that you hope that they remember, and that you hope that they'll use to connect with you in the future, what would it be? It's a brief, short statement. And so as we're going in and talking about this, an elevator pitch is a brief, in-depth, personal statement about yourself. It's usually the answer to the first question that you're going to get asked in every interview setting. And I say that because most people don't recognize, they hear this question when they're in interviews, and it's coming. Everyone knows this. Tell me a little bit about yourself. That's a invitation for you during an interview setting to really go into detail about who you are, what you're looking for, and what your goals are and what your interests are, to connect both professionally and personally with the person that you're meeting with. We know this question comes up in interview settings, especially if you've done interviews before. You've probably had this question, and if you haven't really thought through an elevator pitch, most times you probably would have recognized yourself as stumbling through that question. You're like, well, what am I supposed to answer? Is this supposed to be a fun question? Is this supposed to be really professional? What are they asking? Like, you second guess yourself whenever you hear that question, because really, we don't, as much as we like talking about ourselves in daily life with our friends and family, we don't like talking about ourselves in interview settings for some reason. And I don't know necessarily why that is, but we always that's the one question in an interview that if you ask people if they messed up something, you're like, yeah, just that first question, which just wasn't really good. And so this elevator pitch is meant to help you as you're engaging in those circumstances, be that first question in an interview setting. But it's also a speech that you can give anywhere. It doesn't have to be in an interview that you're giving this elevator pitch. It doesn't only have to be in an interview setting. It could be a meeting with coworkers on your first day. You're meeting with new people, coworkers that you're going to be working, with directly, managers maybe on the first day you get to meet the company president that says a speech and says hello to all the new hires. Like, this is your opportunity to really introduce yourself to them, and you don't want to lose that opportunity by not having something that's prepared and ready to go to provide to them. You can do this at networking events. People walk into networking events all the time, and they're like, okay, I'm here, now what do I do now? Like, I'm at the event. Do I just go up and say hello to someone? And in many cases, you can have an elevator pitch prepared for yourself for networking events as well, something that's ready to go so that you can go up and immediately start a conversation with them. You can do it during company meetings, during your internships. I mean, I could list so many ways you can use this elevator pitch. It is the first answer to the general question in an interview, but it's useful far beyond just the interview setting. It's also a way to start off any interview on a good note. It's You don't want to stumble through that first answer, the first question of an interview. You don't want to stumble through it. Oftentimes people will say, I didn't get a good start, so it affected me for the rest of the event. It could be in athletics, it could be in anything. But oftentimes, if you start off well in an interview, you're going to do much better during the rest of the interview. And so you want to make sure that you're getting a good start as you're going through an interview. And you want to make sure you nail that first question so you have the confidence behind you as you're going through and answering some of the other questions that you're going to be getting. You also don't want to stumble through meeting someone at a networking event for the first time, because that leads to so many awkward conversations. Before I knew about elevator pitches and introductions, like I can tell you that I was at events where I didn't have the best conversations with people because I didn't start them off in a good way. I didn't start them off with a way that invited conversation. I didn't start them off giving people much of a detail about who I was, what I was doing there, and why I was talking to them. And if you don't start off like that, you don't start off in a really positive note with the information that they need to really engage with you in a conversation, it's not going to go anywhere, and it's going to become really awkward, and you're going to end up being the third party to a conversation circle of people at a networking event, and it's just going to seem strange, and you're not going to want to do it again. And so you want to have something ready to start off that conversation on a positive note. It should always feel fresh, though. Your elevator pitch and your introduction should not be something, you notice how I spoke. And yes, while I said a few times in my elevator pitch, which I try not to do, everyone does it. But even though I did that, it still sounded fresh and like it was flowing for the first time. It didn't sound like my elevator pitch was kind of written down and scripted for a one size fits all conversation. Your elevator pitch should always be fresh. You know, if you memorize a speech, it's going to be easier maybe for you to give that speech directly, but it's going to sound more superficial maybe. It's not going to sound as genuine as if you were to, kind of extemporaneously give your elevator pitch every time. I would, just practice over and over giving that speech again and again in a conventional, a normal tone, without trying to, create some, I have people who try to write their elevator pitches and they write it in paragraph form. And it's just like, you're going to want to change that based on the context you're giving the speech in. It's not like a one size fits all situation. So you should always have a fresh pitch every time you go into something. It's also a continual work in progress as you gain experience, as you work in new positions, as you take additional classes, as you develop your sense of direction for where you want to go in the future. Your elevator pitch is going to follow that, and it's going to change over time. So having a scripted speech is not always going to be helpful for you. So what's typically included in the elevator pitch? There's four things I want you to make sure you're thinking about including in that. Personal identification, name, where you're from, school, etc. You notice that I mentioned my name, where I went to school, or where I worked in my elevator pitch. You should also include some interests and goals of yours. What are you looking for? Obviously, my pitch that I gave at the beginning was directed towards alumni at a visit that I was at with Wittenberg students. I do that pitch all the time when I'm at. I haven't done it for a while because of the pandemic, but I give that speech regularly in the setting of companies and organizations. And so, my interests and goals are really to help the alumni feel valued. And so I do a lot of thinking in my pitch, as opposed to, I'm not looking for a job there. I'm looking for a better connection with the alum and with the organization that I'm talking to. And so you can kind of sense that I'm trying to do that in my pitch. But for those of you who are, going to be doing this for interviews or for networking purposes, talk about what you're interested in. What are your goals? What are you looking for? Are you looking to go into this industry? Are you thinking about this type of career field? Include that in your pitch. Also, talk about your experience and skills. What do you bring? What is your value proposition? You notice how I talked about what the work I did. I talked about my previous experience and working with digital marketing and working with car dealerships and managing their accounts and their budget spend. That's my experience. That's what I bring to the table. I am working in a professional setting in higher ed right now, having come from working in a business setting before. And so you want to include some of your selling points about who you are to build your own credibility in your pitch. So what is it? What is your value proposition? What do you bring to the company or organization? And then also add a personal touch. You want to connect with the individuals, and you don't want your conversation to sound like it's strictly professional and really serious. Like, you want to connect with those in the room. And so adding a personal touch, like I'm an avid reader, I enjoy the outdoors, whatever, is perfectly fine. You want to be brief with it, maybe a little shorter than I was in my example. I mean, I talked about my wife and her master's program in Columbus. It may be a little long for an elevator pitch, but it's still a personal touch that connects with the room and helps them see not only your professional side, but your side as a person in general. And so you want to include that in your elevator pitch. And again, this is kind of a logical order from personal identification to interest to experience to your personal touch. But variations of this are fine as long as the flow of your argument makes sense in your pitch. As long as your pitch flows well, makes sense, these things can be moved around and reordered depending on how you want to do it. I would recommend doing your personal identification always as the first thing, but then like 2 to 4, the rest of those things you can flip around and order in a way that makes sense for your pitch that you're giving. Your value proposition is the key set of skills, experiences, abilities, and things like that you bring that are going to aid a company, a problem, or a project that you're working on, depending on the context that you're giving this speech in. Your past experience provides you with the skills and traits that offer something to a company, and you want to mention that in your pitch. What is it about your past experience that you think is relevant? Make sure you're including that. And you've already watched, or you will watch, the soft skills PowerPoint for this week. But just a reminder that just because you've not held a job or an internship in a field that you're pursuing doesn't mean you don't have anything to offer. If you don't have the technical skills, include your soft skills in your elevator pitch. And I'm not going to go into the soft skills slide because I talk about it in the soft skills presentation, but just to know that you should include those in your elevator pitch. So let's talk about the delivery. You're going to be presenting your pitch in a wide variety of places, settings, and to a wide variety of people for many different purposes, especially after you get your first job and you're starting to build your network, or maybe you're starting to build professional relationships for reasons other than to get a job. Maybe you want to build relationships with professionals so that you can be better in your own company. You can connect with them to make, a sale or something like that. You want to know your audience as you're getting ready to give this pitch. Who are you speaking to? You don't want to have a pre-prepared speech that is, that's a one size fits all, because you want to speak to the audience that you're presenting to in the moment. Potential employer is going to want to know information that's going to be different from the client that you're working with. For instance, on this class's case study project, they're going to be looking for different information from you. And so be contextual with what information you're providing them. And you should always be ready to make slight modifications on the spot to your introduction. You're never going to know what someone's going to say when they introduce themselves to you or whatever. You're never going to know what about a company is going to change the information you want to give. Maybe they say they really hate people who have, marketing backgrounds. Well, maybe then you want to start changing your pitch based on the context clues you're feeling from the company or the organization, to make your pitch more relevant for them. And you may need to do some of that stuff on the spot. So you may need to switch it around quickly. Um, Nonverbal behaviors. You want to make sure that when possible that you're standing up to give your elevator pitch. I mean, this isn't always going to be possible depending on the context that you're in, but standing up and having that posture and just having, kind of a sense of presence in the room is really important as you're trying to give that speech. Watch your body posture and hand movements. You want to seem confident in your pitch, and you don't want those things to be distracting, like swaying wide, fast hand movements, those types of things. I've known people that when they give their elevator pitch, in mine, I kind of use my hands a little bit, but there's a difference between me going like this the whole time I'm talking, and sometimes that's just the natural movement for some, and you just want to watch that you're not doing something that's going to distract you. I use my hands quite a bit, like when I'm talking, but you want to make sure that it's not too distracting and continuous. There's nothing wrong with using your hands or body language in your speech, and in many ways, it's actually helpful to explain your points, to use that body language. But you want to make sure that it's not something that's going to draw attention away from what you're trying to say in the moment. Make eye contact with the audience. Don't lock in on a specific person or group. It makes them feel uncomfortable if you're staring at one contact or one person in the room, if you're trying to introduce yourself to multiple. But make eye contact with the entire audience that you're trying to present to. And also, I think I may have mentioned this on a previous, maybe on the case study presentation slide, but you also need to make sure you know your space and your tone. Bigger rooms, you may need to speak up. Smaller rooms, your voice may boom too much that you need to just quiet it down a little bit. And the size of the room, the number of people in the room, the ceiling height, all of those things really are going to be contextual for you to give an effective speech. And you just want to make sure that you're aware of the space that you're giving the speech in. You want to vary your vocal pitch slightly during the time to emphasize points, but you also want to avoid upspeak, which means when you're finishing a sentence, you kind of go up. Your voice it's hard for me to do it, but when you're ending a sentence, you oftentimes have a little bit of a higher raised tone in your voice. So try to avoid upspeak if possible. There's a lot of resources online for you to learn a little more about what upspeak is, and how to recognize if you're doing it or not. I tend to have downspeak, where my voice drops really low when I end, and oftentimes it can be hard to hear me when I'm finishing a sentence. So anyway. Watch filler language. It's fine if you have a few. I have some ums in my pitch, and that's just something I try to work on filtering out. But you really want to try to avoid them at all costs and try to get rid of as many of them as possible in your speech. It's very hard to do. If you want, I do it even as I'm talking to you right now. It's really a difficult thing to get rid of. If you want to try to get rid of filler language, then maybe a suggestion I would have is to give yourself a topic and sit down and say, I'm going to talk about this topic for 2 minutes straight. And if I say, I have to restart the 2 minutes. It's just an exercise for you to try to get yourself to pause rather than to say, because it's really easy to say where there should be a pause, because you're trying to keep you're trying to make it sound like you're not pausing, and you're trying to keep some continuity in your speech, but it just is filler language that's not needed. So watch the ums. I try to do it. I am guilty as anyone in this class of doing it, but just try to watch them. Watch using acronyms or terms that your audience may not know or be familiar with. Again, like your resume, don't use acronyms like the hyper or the HWA or cable, or any of these different acronyms that Wittenberg has, SAC or whatever. Give the organization name. It'll take a little bit more of your time to say it in your pitch, but give the organization name so they don't have any question or confusion about what it is. And don't make statements like or something that assumes an opinion about those you're pitching to. A lot of people in their pitch will be like, and blank, blank, and they it's assuming they do know it, and if they don't, it's going to catch them off guard. So try not to use those types of statements, and don't start out your interview by saying, hey, hi everyone, how's it going. You notice that my pitch, I said like good morning or something like that. Start with a formal introduction. Don't just, obviously for a networking event that's a little more informal, hey or hi might be fine, but in an interview setting, be a little bit more formal and a little bit more professional. Tell a story. Obviously, don't sound robotic, like don't sound robotic, and don't jump from one thing to another with no connection. You need to tell a story that connects the entire pitch with your interest, goals, experience. It needs to have an overarching theme where all those things connect together. You want to be professional. Don't try to reflect on your experience in a negative light. Just, keep your experience positive. And try, you're never going to know the entire belief system or perspective of the person you're presenting to, and so trying to avoid controversial topics or offensive content or highly charged topics where everyone has a different position is going to be helpful for you. Try not to include those in your elevator pitch if possible. Okay, so that is the main set of content that we're going to talk about for this section.